Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our virtual Capital Connection call for week 9 that we're in now. I want to thank, of course, our sponsors for this virtual Capital Connection series, Advent Health, Polk State College, with the support of Tampa Electric. So we will dive right into this week. Of course, we're finishing up week 8 and in week 9 now. And as I mentioned, every week we do put out a legislative priority statement, which we base a lot of the information on this call about, although sometimes you can't predict what's going to come up. And so there's other things that we're watching as well. And of course, I know all of you on this call by now are familiar with our legislative delegation that are representing Polk County up in Tallahassee. So we'll jump right in here. We have currently 3,090 bills that have been filed during this session. And of those, 6 have currently been signed by the governor. So of course, we've talked about COVID liability, HB1, which was signed last week, the Combating Public Disorder, that was signed here in Polk County in a press conference. Main Street Fairness, and then of course 3 other bills that don't quite make the headlines like those other bills have, but the state agency law enforcement radio system was funding the radio maintenance needs of state law enforcement agencies through July 2026. And then 2 having to do with trust funds. The Triumph Gulf Coast Trust Fund actually goes back to the BP oil spill, and is essentially the fund that those monies from the settlement with BP goes into. And then trust fund terminations removes the Public Defender's Revenue Trust Fund from the Justice Administrative Commission. Anyway, that's more so combining trust funds in terms of that goes. But those don't make the headlines, so I thought I'd share that with you in terms of the bills that have been signed by the governor so far this session. As I mentioned, COVID liability has passed, as well as Main Street Fairness, and we've gone over those in previous weeks. If you'd like more information on those, feel free to reach out to me directly. As I mentioned to you last week, Visit Florida, the bill that was proposed to essentially get rid of the sunset provision and codify Visit Florida, is likely not to make it, but both budgets have fully funded Visit Florida. So at least that's good that fight goes on to another day in terms of making that a permanent fixture. And then with the QTI legislation, the update on that is, of course, it was built into the Senate tax package, and the House tax package had the tourist development tax modifications in terms of it going towards resiliency. And we thought those were going to be the bargaining chips as of yesterday. In terms of my buddy Frank Walker at the Florida Chamber, he didn't necessarily think either may make it through, but you never know. So we'll continue to watch that as well. And this is kind of an outline, updated outline of what's included in both of those tax packages. Of course, they're the ones that us as Floridians are used to: the back to school sales tax holiday, the disaster preparedness tax holiday. And as I mentioned to you last week, in the House, they actually have a sales tax exemption for live events and movies, looking at that as a stimulus, essentially, after the absolutely horrendous year that industry has had related to COVID. So budget conferencing is ongoing, and I thought I saw that Chad is on the call today, Chad Davis. Chad, if you are willing, I'm going to promote you to panelist. So when I see you come up here, if you don't want to be promoted to panelist, let me know. There we go. And see if you have just a minute to give us an update from your perspective. So there you are. Morning, Chad.
Hey, good morning.
I didn't have a chance to talk to you this morning to make sure that was okay, but if you're okay, I want to pitch it to you for a second to talk about budget conferencing.
Sure, absolutely. Yes, so we are coming at the very end of our budget conferencing. We do expect something today. According to the Florida Constitution, we have a 72-hour cooling off period before we can vote on the budget. So the time that the budget drops today, that'll be the time on Friday that we could vote on the budget and get out of here. So we're basically just watching to see what happens and start the clock ticking. It went, I think, relatively smoothly from previous years that I've seen. I'm not aware of any major hiccups or snags along the road. We thought, I personally thought we'd be done a little bit sooner, but we had time. We were ahead of the schedule as we went into budget conferencing. So we did take a little bit more time and worked on some of the details. If there was something I would a way I would describe this year's budget, it would be that we had more money than we expected. So we did fund a lot of things to their, what they were pre-COVID, but we made a lot of that non-recurring, and we put a lot of measures into law that would require some evaluation over the next year. So things like Visit Florida not becoming codified. Same thing with the ease scholarships that help the private schools. We set up a matrix now that'll kind of guide how that funding goes, but we knew that would also affect them if that was in place now. So we put some non-recurring funding in to make sure that they are held whole this year, and then we have a year to evaluate and see if they can meet those standards that we put in place. So that's kind of the way I look at the budget. Of course, we're still going through it. We're learning new things about it as we dig in even deeper. And as a caveat, the budget was not my it's not my wheelhouse. I do policy more than I do budget. So I'm kind of just learning as everybody else is as it's coming out in the news.
So John, I'm going to keep you on real quick while I click through the next couple slides that have to do with budget as well. But of course, as you mentioned, the goal is, and I'm sure there's some sort of pool going on all the legislative aides up there of, are we going to be done on Friday? Are we going to be done on Friday? But if that gets submitted, I'm not sure if submitted is the right word to use. There is that 72-hour cooling off period. So the goal would be that gets hopefully done today in order for you guys to end on time on Friday, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So one thing that we talked about last week, and I know that you were deep into the rules committee last week during our call, but we talked a little bit about Polk State. And at this point last week, there was still a potential of a $4.4 million cut to Polk State. And from my conversation yesterday with Polk State, it looks like that has been hammered out. And the House has really looked at the Senate side of the higher education funding. So that's a positive, not just for Polk State necessarily, but for all of our state colleges across the board. And then an update I received yesterday is that Medicaid funding levels have been restored, i.e. avoiding that dramatic cut that was potentially being discussed on that side from the hospital perspective. And so really an outlying discussion from my understanding is what to do with the federal funding. And this was a graphic as of yesterday. So this could have changed between 10 a.m. yesterday and today, but kind of showed the difference between the Senate offer and the House offer. And from my understanding, Chad, this is an area that is still probably people in rooms right now talking about how this is getting hammered out.
Yes, they did have a pass last night. I didn't get a chance to take a look at it to see what they did. But yeah, they've made significant progress on that.
That's good. That's good. So this is outdated as anything is 5 minutes later in this last week of session. But some of the areas that you can see were being discussed there. And I know in some initial discussions, affordable housing was something that was being discussed as a potential for this non-recurring. So we'll have to take a peek at what came through last night to see where that landed on that area. So now what is interesting as the budget gets worked through and submitted for that 72-hour cooling off period, then you get to put on your policy hat, right? And so the rest of the week is really about those bills that still have a survival chance that are more policy related, correct?
That's correct. And it's being the last week of session, this is when anything can happen. This is when things happen really, really fast. And I am tracking anything that's being filed, amendments that are being filed on the bills. This is the time where if a bill didn't quite make it all the way out of committee, it might get amended into another bill that's on the floor. This is also where we have the major food fights between the Senate and the House. I know there are a few things in the House that they didn't care for what we did, so they're putting their language back on and sending it back over. So it'll get pretty tense in the next few days. And more so than other sessions, we have played by the rules in a way that has maybe not gone the way it has in years past, where bills had to go through all their committees. We're using the rules to pull bills out of committee straight to the floor, which I had not seen as much happen before. And so that kind of means just about anything is in play that hasn't been like flat out rejected. But it's going, like I said in previous weeks, it's going to be stuff that you've heard about, policies that have been discussed in the news. I don't think about anything so shocking that just came completely out of left field. But yes, anything that you may think is done could still pop back in these last few days. So it makes it a little bit exciting and a little bit stressful.
So according to Politico, data privacy is one of those areas that will be one of those jockeying points this week. Workforce program overhaul, expansion of vouchers, which there's a prettier title to that in terms of the discussions, and then no fault insurance. Those are several that Politico outlined last night in what could be the food fights for this week. But what are if you don't mind, behind the curtain a little bit, what are those major ones that you're watching from a policy perspective?
So there's an insurance bill that we sent over to the House that deals with, among other things, roof repairs after hurricanes, things that are meant to curtail some of the litigation going on. And the House is, my understanding is they were working on some compromise language and they're going to send that back. But that's been very contentious. You basically have I'd say the Senate is a little bit more in favor of the insurance industry, and then the House is a little more favor of the trial bar. So that's kind of being hashed out. And I'm so some of the other stuff it's just you never know what's going to come back. I think today in the Senate, they are taking up some like some of the COVID relief type stuff. Education policy is still kind of being hammered out. The election bill we sent over, I think the House is going to put some more amendments on that and send it back over. So those are the things that I'm seeing right now. But anytime it looks like they're reaching a compromise, it usually at this point in the game, if they send it back and they haven't just accepted it, then it's probably not going to make it. At that point, it's become a food fight.
Okay. So I'm going to run through a few slides with some of the stuff that you talked about, but I want, if you don't mind hanging in, just
Absolutely.
in case you have any comments on any of them, Chad, that would be, I think, helpful to the people that are listening on the call. So I mentioned consumer data privacy. Again, as of 10 a.m. yesterday, this is where that lies. From a Chamber of Commerce perspective, obviously this impacts larger businesses in terms of how they have to handle the revenue. But from a consumer perspective, things that sound like, oh, that would probably be a good thing. But there are obviously provisions in that that are interesting from a perspective of the consumer. So you'll see that information on that slide there. The constitutional amendment reform bill was one we've talked about over several weeks in terms of limiting the donation that a single contributor can give to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot. And so watching to see if that might make it across the finish line or not. And then the property insurance bill related to more the legal reform. And as Chad mentioned, there's always kind of this push-pull because of, obviously trial lawyers have a big lobby, and then there are actually a lot of elected officials who are attorneys as well. So how that all goes through the system. But this is something that I know we have represented from Habitat for Humanity on the call today. This is something that as we look at insurance reform is very important because it does have real world, obviously, consequences to the consumer in terms of how this is filtered through. And then one thing that happened this week, and I don't understand all the intricacies of this because I know that it is very complicated, but from my understanding, and Chad, feel free to chime in on this one, but from my understanding, the governor met with the leadership of the Seminole tribe and had come to some sort of compact or agreement. However, it's way too late in session for them to take it up from the legislative side. So there is already a special session that has been scheduled for mid-May. Do you have any comments on this one in particular?
Sure. So, this is something we've been trying every year that I've been in the process, and this is the furthest we've gotten. We did have some bills in the Senate that we were trying to go forward with implementing this, and then they decided, no, we're just going to do special session. And that's actually pretty smart. I don't know anything, so don't read into this more than I'm going to say. But should the governor maybe have some issues with some of the things that have been given to him now, coming back May 17th may give us an opportunity if we have the votes to override any vetoes. So that, to me, that's what the timing suggests. I don't know that for sure, but that's kind of what the timing suggests. Now, as far as what they're trying to do, one of the things they're doing is they're creating a gaming commission to try to further regulate gaming in Florida. Right now, we don't really have that. This will be created, I think, within DVPR. And then they're also looking at more decoupling. We banned a few years ago greyhound racing. The greyhound racetracks have their games, slot machines, and some card tables. And so we allowed them to continue their operation just without the greyhound racing. Now we're going to expand that to also include, I think, horse tracks and some of the other racing to decouple that. The problem with that, though, is then we're also allowing some of those to expand their operations, which could be a violation of the No Casinos Amendment that passed last year. So this is going to be, I think we're taking our Constitution out for a little joyride and see what happens. Because from what I'm reading, it does kind of seem to violate at least the spirit of the amendment, if not the letter of the amendment. So yeah, we'll wait and see what happens. But in the end, it's going to bring in some hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue, which is kind of how the legislators are looking at it. That would, in a year like COVID, and then of course whenever we have hurricanes, that money is also, it's very, very helpful. So I think that's kind of how they're trying to weigh all that out and see what they can come up with. Yeah, we'll be back May 17th for that week. I don't expect it to last longer than a week, maybe only a few days, but they'll have most of that already hammered out by the time we get up here.
Mhm. Well, and this will be interesting to watch. Obviously, there are very strong lobbying groups that don't want to see the expansion of gambling within the state. The Florida Chamber of Commerce is one of them. They've always taken a position on that. And of course, you have that family-friendly destination driven, especially in the center of the state when it comes to Orlando and your Disneys and Universals and all of that. So it will be interesting to watch for sure to see how all of this gets hammered out with that. But I thought that was interesting. It's not really it's always been one of those things that's like, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. And this news came out obviously to see how that impacts. So thank you for your inside baseball on that a little bit. And then end of session, these so-called wild cards is what Frank at the Florida Chamber likes to call them, but election reform. And this goes to, for example, we've talked a little bit about drop boxes and what that is looking like. And the House bill requires voters dropping off ballots in drop boxes to show identification. And they want to revamp signature matching and things of that nature. And from my understanding, the Senate bill deals with things that can be given out to people waiting in line and things of that nature. So again, according to the Politico article I read last night, that is an area where maybe it won't cross the finish line depending on how those bills would come together.
Yes, I think we'll have something. I think that's become a very important priority of the governor. But it seems like the drop boxes are now the main point of contention, and how we use those. And what it comes down to really is a lot of us have used drop boxes in years past. So my experience in Polk County, I dropped off my parents' ballots at an early voting location. There was a poll worker that was working there. She looked at the ballots, and I think she either checked my voter registration card or my ID, and she did kind of verify that I didn't seem like I was doing anything illegitimate. And then I also have dropped off mail-in ballots at the supervisor of elections office, like for myself and my brother, and it was just like a mailbox with a camera. So I understand there's a whole spectrum of policies and ways that you can do this, and I think they're just trying to get to one that's going to keep it as secure as possible while also being convenient, because that's what it comes down to. It's a matter of convenience here. One of the things that I've been watching, and I think we're coming to a good spot, is how we handle those who are in hospitals. People that are unable to vote because they're in a hospital. I think now we're expanding the ability of nurses to be able to help with that. Because that was brought to my attention by the lobbyists of Baycare. We were talking about some of these issues, and that came up, and I've never thought of it. I've never been in that position, but that's a really good thing to consider. Not everybody has maybe a family member who could take their ballots, and we want to make sure that those people are able to vote as well.
probably highlighted more than ever last year when they couldn't have a family member in the hospital with them. That's interesting. And again, if you're not in that situation, or if you're not in a 100-year pandemic, you might not realize how much that can impact, especially in well, any election year, frankly, whether it's your local like Lakeland City Commission runoff election or whatever it might be. So absolutely. And then vaccine passports, that's another. There was a provision from a business community perspective that some felt may be a little bit too intrusive into that employee employer relationship. But from my understanding, that has been taken out of the discussion of the vaccine passports, and more so related to the consumer interaction with the business versus the employee employer relationship when it comes to whether that is requiring a vaccine or not. Any insight on this particular discussion, Chad, from your perspective?
As far as where we're going with that, I'm not entirely sure. I think, the governor did sign his executive order. And I understand the concerns, what we're going to have when we start opening, especially international travel and cruise travel. There are going to be all the policies all across the board on how people handle vaccines. I know I've been watching over in California as they're getting ready to open their theme parks. They've restricted only in-state people can visit the theme parks. And then they're talking about when they started allowing out-of-state people, those people have to have vaccines to visit the theme parks. So, here in Florida, we did not do that. And I can't imagine us going backwards now and requiring that when we've had almost a year's worth of success and opening those up. We don't have any outbreaks that are tied to the theme park industry. So, I don't see us rolling back things that already exist. But as we bring in international travel and we bring in cruise travel, I think that's where we're going to start seeing the discussion a little more. And then, of course, the question will be how much can the state government or the governor do in handling some of that, since we're dealing with international travel. So I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, I know everybody wants to be safe, but at the same time, you do have privacy issues, and you do have just we're a tourism industry. It's got to be hospitality. If people feel like they're not welcomed, or they feel like they're not being treated right just because they didn't get the vaccine for whatever reason. Many people have good reasons for not getting the vaccines. That could really impact our reputation. We want to make sure that we're staying open.
Mhm. Yeah, it is interesting to watch. And of course, it's an international conversation because we're seeing, the European Union and I mean, Iceland opened back up for Americans booking travel. And I feel like everyone I know has booked a trip to Iceland now. They're so eager to get out get out and travel. So it'll be interesting to watch how just internationally, how this conversation forms. And it'll be an interesting case study between California and obviously the from Merlin Entertainments that's got Legoland in Carlsbad, and you can compare Florida. We have our own little case studies comparing Florida to California. Walt Disney World is a good example. The general manager of Legoland Florida here reported at the city commission retreat, they are seeing a lot of visitation and expecting the summer to look potentially like 2019 numbers when it comes to visitation. And that's a great thing for the local economy. There, obviously, the majority is Florida travel, as well as that drive market travel. Obviously, the international markets have not come back, understandably, but to see that people are really raring to go and want to get out and travel. And then one other thing, and this is something that I think will be an ongoing discussion beyond legislative session, but it is the number one piece of feedback that we are receiving from our members right now is they have jobs and they want to hire people, but they are having an incredibly hard time hiring. And I'm not blaming it all on the unemployment benefits, because that certainly is something that has been a godsend to many people over the course of the last year, even people that I know and are very close to in terms of what those benefits were able to do through layoffs and furloughs and things of that nature. But at this point, there's a lot of discussion about whether the extended benefits, and now, of course, those benefits from a federal perspective have been extended through September, how they will get through. In fact, I passed a billboard yesterday. Legoland Florida is offering a $500 signing bonus. Rex Jackson reported yesterday to me that they are expanding the number of full-time jobs for those frontline employees that include 401k and health benefits and things of that nature to try to draw people back into working. And in the state of Florida, the requirement that was waived through the pandemic that requires you to be actively seeking employment, that expired. That executive order that waived that restriction expired on the 24th. And to my knowledge, has not been extended. And so hopefully that will, that job requirement search will be a good thing, because the jobs are starting to come back. And that goes from the tourism industry down to, there's a t-shirt printing company in town, just our small businesses. And it's not just impacting the large businesses, it's definitely impacting the small businesses as well. So I know, as you see on the screen, Senator Broder had filed an extension, but I don't see that going anywhere. It passed the Senate, but I'm not sure that the House has taken that up yet. Chad, I don't know if you have any inside baseball on that.
I think they're still working on that. The real, we are trying to reform unemployment a little bit. We're trying to increase the weekly benefit. I think the Senate passed was 375. The governor has kind of indicated that he's not interested in that, but that does seem to be very important to the Senate president and leadership over here. So they're still working that out. I can imagine we may come up with some sort of a compromise there. But I think coming up with nothing is not what they want or what we expect. So I don't know where it's going to land. I know the House is going to take it up and consider it, and we'll see what compromise they come up with. I think we will get something to the governor. I personally, I hope he does sign it. I think we've made a good faith effort to try to take into a lot of the concerns we've learned over the last year. As one who's handled a lot of those phone calls in the district all year long. I saw what it did to people, and I understand, how devastating that time can be, and we don't want to be in that position again. But at the same time, I've heard from lots of employers, just as you mentioned, who cannot hire. I saw Disney just started hiring again this year or this week after, they laid off all of those thousands of employees. So yeah, things are definitely starting to look up, and we're looking for a very busy summer in the state. So, I'm hoping, as you said, the governor's executive order expiring will help push people in that direction. I think the sooner we can get the numbers down and the vaccinations up and the masks are gone and things start to feel way more like normal, I think people are going to want to work. I think they'll want to get out in public and try to start providing again. But yeah, right now it's a big problem from what I understand.
Well, and I don't want to belittle the importance of the reform to the unemployment system, because I think last year highlighted the weaknesses in the system, and not just from a pressure point, but because of the massive number of people that needed to use it, but also it highlighted to a lot of us that maybe didn't interact with it as closely, the problems that existed even prior to the pandemic that needed to be shored up and fixed. And so, increasing benefits long term, regardless of pandemic or not, is probably a good thing. But just looking at how that all interplays with getting people back to work and helping our economy recover. So more to come on that, obviously, and that will continue to be watched through. Just to highlight a couple more bills, not a whole lot of movement. As you see, I've highlighted the movement. The cottage food industry bill that we've been watching is on Senate special order today. And then you'll see not a whole lot of movement on those other bills that we've been watching there. And then beverage law passed the Senate, passed the House. And the craft distilleries passed the Senate, passed the House, and a message has been sent to the Senate. So this is that point where all those policy things are going back and forth, and they are looking at that. So calendar for the week is session. So as Chad said, they'll be going through and looking at all of those policy bills that once the budget gets fleshed out, they can now interplay with those policy bills to get those across the finish line. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I haven't seen any questions come in to the Q&A. And so pop any of them in there. I'm just looking at my notes to make sure that I didn't forget to mention anything. Next week's call will actually be on Wednesday. So everyone that's registered on the call, you have registered up through today's calls, but I will send out an email to you all to register for Wednesday's call. And that primarily is to give us time to see how everything wrapped up and then have that call on Wednesday. So if you are able to hop on Wednesday, same time, 10 o'clock next Wednesday, we will have that call. And I think that is all I had on my list. Chad, is there anything else that I missed? Oh, there is one thing. This is not necessarily to do with legislative session, but there was some language already submitted for review to the Supreme Court regarding legalizing marijuana. That their first pass on language was thrown out, if you will, by the Florida Supreme Court. So they still have time to rewrite the language and resubmit. I think February would be the deadline that they're looking at there. But just to give you a heads up on that, that is definitely something that is going to be looked at for the what would be 2022 ballot. So just outside of session, our other branch of government had some movement on that this week. So without any other questions, I look forward to seeing you all next week on our call. Chad, thank you so much for being my co-host. Even if you didn't know it today, being my co-host on the call this morning and giving us a little of a behind the curtain viewpoint of it. All right. Thank you guys. We'll see you next week.